Hello and welcome to another episode of the Happy Head podcast. My name's Paul and I'm your host today. Well, that went round the wrong way, but never mind, we'll carry on. And today I've got Joe Huey with me. Joe is a personal change expert. Hello, Joe. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm really good. Thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. Tell me, what is a personal change expert for those of us that aren't in the know?
So I guess I picked that sort of title because I work with specifically daughters of alcoholics, and I work with them to make changes to their personal life, whatever those issues might be. And because I've done over 24 years of self-development myself, I thought I'm probably an expert in the process of change. And a lot of people that I help, that's what they're looking for is personal change, personal self-development.
So when you say you've done 24 years of personal sort of self-work, what did that entail as such?
It was kind of a blend of all sorts of different therapies, going to events, reading self-help books, doing courses. I started initially, sort of, like I say, about 24 years ago, starting to do therapy, working on myself because it was important to me at the time after my dad's passed away from alcoholism, and I recognized I had some challenges in my relationships, friendships, and I just thought, do you know what, I need to do something about this. And so I kind of started this journey, and at the time I wasn't really aware as to what was really behind all of my issues. And then obviously, we started delving into my past and things came up, and as I sort of progressed through sort of therapy, different things came up, and then I was recommended books to read, and I started to have a real keen interest in developing myself, really improving myself, and probably because I'd received quite a lot of criticism from my dad about when are you going to change, and so I felt like I wasn't good enough and I wasn't okay the way I was, and so I spent a long time feeling like I needed to fix myself. And I did that through lots of different things: mindfulness, I did hypnosis, I did emotional freedom technique, neuro-linguistic programming, traditional counseling, all sorts.
What about things like CBT and talk therapies and all that kind of stuff? Do you go through that as well?
Yeah, I did. I mean, the first sort of thing that I ever did really was talking therapies, and that's where I learned. It wasn't just about talking about what had happened to me, but actually learning about different things. And I learned about the rescuer, persecutor, victim, sort of drama triangle. I learned about the different games that people play, and I found it very interesting. And I think that's probably, I got a bit hooked, I suppose. And they do say when you start to do self-development, you can often get pretty hooked on it. And I just loved being around the sort of people that were also into that. I did cognitive behavioral therapy as well. For me, that wasn't one of my favorites, I won't lie. And the talking therapies were useful initially. I think they did definitely bring something for me in terms of trying to understand, which I love to understand. So I think that really did help. But then later on, I sort of discovered different techniques which I preferred.
Okay, I've got to ask you, what was your preferred or favorite therapy if CBT didn't kind of go down well for you? What was the one that did it? What was the one that did the trick?
Definitely when I used emotional freedom technique and also neuro-linguistic programming, I just felt that it was it felt more innovative, and it felt so different to any of the other techniques that I'd experienced in the therapeutic sort of environment. And then obviously I went on to train to do those two things because I was so passionate about them and really felt that they made a tangible difference to my life in a very effective way, which didn't always involve sitting down talking about my trauma, which often isn't always the best route. And so I found them really effective and very often very quick to get to, my subconscious. Whereas I didn't really feel like I got that in some of the other techniques that I'd experienced.
Just remind me, EFT, is that the tapping?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the tapping. Yeah.
And like the chakra points, or like
So
the side of
meridian.
the head. That's it, meridian
So
points. Yeah.
it's the same points that are used for acupuncture, but you don't use needles. You use your fingertips and you just tap on the different areas of the body and repeat a certain phrase. And I guess I love that technique because it works not only with your emotions and your subconscious, but it's working with your body and releasing blocks of energy in your body, which obviously traditional counseling in a sense isn't doing. It's more of talking therapy, although you could argue that there is an element of that. But yeah, so for me, it really works really well for the body and the emotions in your mind.
I've had acupuncture, and I found that it kind of was okay. No, that's not the right word. It worked, but it was kind of temporary in that it sort of like maybe it got me to here, and then the benefits kind of wound down. And I'm guessing it's one of those things that you've got to have continuously to find a longer term benefit. I'm not sure about. I've never had EFT. I've done it on myself, but I've never sort of been training it as such.
Yeah.
But anyway, what made you feel the need to start this journey, to go through all the different therapies and strategies that you mentioned briefly there?
I think that the need, in all honesty, I think the need came from this, this belief that I wasn't good enough as I am, and that's ultimately came from my dad. Why can't you be more like your sister? Why can't you do this? Why, when are you going to change? That is the phrase I heard a lot of the time over a very long period of, many years. And so subconsciously that sends you a message to say, well, actually, you're not all right as you are. You need to be different. And that's the thing that I think was always in my mind, and that was my belief that I wasn't good enough. And that was the motivator, I suppose, to make some changes. But also, like I said, I did start to recognize as I got to about 21 that my relationships and friendships, I was having quite a lot of problems with them, which again is very common for daughters of alcoholics. So, that's not surprising, but that really was the key time for me. I remember when I first started then. And I wanted to be, I didn't want to be like my dad, and I just wanted to have a better life. I wanted to be a better person, because I recognized parts of me that I didn't really like.
Okay, you've mentioned a couple of times that your dad was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Did the alcoholism cause specific problems, or are you kind of able to separate all the negativity he was sending at you, or was that caused by the alcoholism, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. You sort of say that, because it's only now that I look back and reflect and think, well, actually, was that just part of his personality, or was that the alcohol that was, making him behave in that way? And, it's quite difficult. I mean, he was an ex-army, in the army, very strict, very regimented. So that aspect of him was probably just his nature. But he drank. Well, I don't remember him really not being a drinker. So, that's my only sort of experience of him. But I think that he didn't know how, he was just the way he was, and that's all I really knew of him. And I think that the alcohol definitely impacts on a person's personality. It can heighten those existing things. So if you're an angry person, it can make you much more angry and aggressive. And so the alcohol had a huge impact in terms of my experience growing up, and it does to pretty much most people that grow up in that environment. I would argue to my death that it doesn't affect somebody. So I think there was a blend really of some of it was just who he was as a person, but the alcohol was definitely a huge factor.
And were you the kind of prime target for all this negativity coming from your dad, or were other members of the family as well?
Yeah, there was, to be honest, he just did it with, mostly it was my older sister and me. He didn't really show that much that I saw. I mean, sometimes he would get aggressive towards my mum, but he doted on her and loved her, but she was petrified of him, as were we. So everything was, we do what you say and we don't question it, that type of home environment. So he would pick on me and on my sister. It wasn't, just purely me. And so we sort of were able to support each other in the difficult times, even though we had sibling rivalry, that happens anyway. But yeah, so it wasn't just aimed at me, that's for sure.
Did your dad know he had problems, or was he one of these kind of people that either pretended it wasn't there or just didn't recognize it a problem at all?
Yeah, no, he didn't. I mean, I don't think he ever sought support for it at all. He, as is often the case, the denial just takes hold, and, he doesn't really, to be honest with you, I wouldn't actually know what he thought, because he was so closed down. I didn't actually really know him. I had an innate need to, be loved by him, and I had an innate need to, every day hoping that this person that was meant to care and love and protect me would one day let me know that. Mm-hmm. And it just never happened. But I still hoped for it every single day, no matter what he did or said.
And you never gave up that hope at all?
No.
You never kind of said one day, well, that's it, it's never going to change, I've had it?
Well, I guess because I was quite young, and what else do? These are the only caregivers you've got. You haven't got another option. And it's like, if these people don't look after me, bad things are going to happen. Even though bad things are happening anyway, I've still only got these two people in my life that are supposed to help and protect me, love me unconditionally. And often it wasn't unconditional.
I get that, I understand. Did you kind of leave home as soon as you could, or did you kind of hang on for a while?
Yeah, I didn't really get a choice in that. My dad kicked me out at the age of 16. I was at college at the time. And so for whatever reason, I can only surmise now that he probably thought he was doing me some favor in educating me about how to live in the big wide world, which were things he'd make reference to in conversation, And so, yeah, he just decided that was it, time for me to go. And I needed to find somewhere to live. I was a student. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. And I guess it's, I think it's important to make a point about the fact that I had a huge amount of anger towards my mother, who was, and many daughters of alcoholics do, because she didn't protect me. In my eyes, at that time, she didn't protect me. She didn't stand up to him. And whilst I might understand that now as an adult, at the time, she was the only person I could rely on, and I couldn't rely on her. And it made life very, very difficult. So my older sister moved out with me. So we basically just shared a room to rent, because I had no money to, really, I was just part-time waitressing.
I was about to ask you, how the hell did you cope? I mean, 16 is still, I don't care what kids at 16 say when he talks to them, but being 16 is still a highly young and vulnerable and sensitive age to be. How did you manage that?
You know what, I think because of the environment when you're growing up, you often become hugely responsible, because you have to help around the house, you have to do things way beyond your age, you have to know, my mum, in all, the frustrations I had, she did teach me to cook, clean, sew, do these sort of day-to-day things. So, I did know how to do those things, because I had to be like a support to my mum, because my dad wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And so I did know how to do, shopping or, that type of thing, because she taught me how to do it. So it was just as well. But part of me was very grateful because I had the freedom of being away from him. And anyone that's lived in that environment will know how valuable that is.
But it's, yeah, I can see the benefits from one aspect, obviously being out of that environment, but on the other side, being kind of almost completely on the own at 16 and being a student and having to be the adult
Yeah.
Essentially in your own kind of life. That must have been really, really challenging.
It was, and I spent a lot of time feeling quite lonely, and, I developed, depression as I got older, and anxiety is huge, again, for a lot of us. And it was scary. And one of my biggest fears now is to be homeless. Because I worry that if, I can't pay my bills, I'm going to lose my home and I'll have nowhere to live. And you can see where that comes from. Sadly, all the things that happen to us as kids tend to affect us as adults.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it was very scary. I mean, obviously, I had my sister there to support me as well, which was nice. But the relationship was obviously very difficult with my mum, because I felt very frustrated and angry towards her.
You mentioned earlier on that this kind of impacted on your relationships. How did that kind of manifest itself?
Well, I became very super critical. My dad was very critical of me, and I think where we have such low self-esteem and things like that, it impacts us. And I became critical of others because, I didn't really like these aspects of myself. Also, it's very difficult for us to recognize emotions, how we're feeling, and near impossible to express them or know what to do with them. Identifying them is hard enough, and then trying to talk about it. And so in relationships and friendships, that can be quite hard. And also the very thing we need the most is the love, the support, the connection. Connection is huge. And it's the one thing that we sabotage ourselves. And because we keep everyone at arm's length, and then we don't let them in, because we're too scared of being hurt, because the two people that we should have been able to, or I should have been able to trust and depend on, weren't there for me. So how can I trust all these other people?
Yeah, no, I understand that. I was going to ask a question there, but it's escaped my mind. I'll come back to it in a second. So you're 16, you've moved out, and you're studying. What happened to you sort of once you'd completed your studies at college? Did you kind of go on to university, or did you go into the job market? What happened?
Yeah, I just went straight into work from college, and then not long after I sort of finished college, I got a job, and then I actually did I spent a month in Thailand and Malaysia. Went with a friend, and then met my sister out there, and then just carried on, came back, and then just carried on, really just doing work. I never went to university or anything like that. I just worked from one job to another, sort of thing.
Okay. After you moved out, was there any kind of further contact with your parents?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been in touch with my mum and everything, and my dad less so, because him and my mum got divorced, and 9 years after my birth, I had a younger sister, and she had a very different life to me and my older sister, and he spent quite a lot of time with her, come to pick her up and so on, and I kind of was at the age where I was involved with my own life, doing my own thing. And then he passed away 2 months before my 21st birthday. So, and it was very sudden. And the police came to tell me when I was at work. It was not a very nice day. And so, but I've always been in touch with my mum and my sisters, and we are actually very close family. Yeah.
How did you feel? I mean, obviously on the day when the police came to tell you that your dad had passed away, how did you kind of feel after that? I mean, given the fact that he kicked you out the house and all the sort of the negativity that he kind of poured on you, people would, expect you to kind of think, well, good riddance kind of thing. Was that how it was with you? Or?
Yeah, 100%. Everyone's like, why are you upset? You hated him. And it's like, yeah, funny that though, but he's still the only dad I had. And I still, we can still, love and hate's fine line, isn't it? And, we hated who he'd become, because underneath that, that sort of Jekyll and Hyde character, he was actually a very nice, very giving, very loving person, would do anything for anybody. But when I was told about his death, I just thought he'd had an accident or something like that. I wasn't expecting death. But I didn't know he'd been unwell and things like that, which my younger sister knew. But I just went into automatic organising mode. That was how I coped. And I know my older sister found that really difficult. But it was just how I cope with the news, I suppose.
Now, you actually you had this mission. I'm just going to read it here. Your mission is to change perceptions about alcohol misuse and how it impacts the family and society as a whole. What does that mean, and how do you kind of represent that?
So for me and my sister, we were talking about this because it's important that, I mean, we all know that alcohol is a drug, and it's legal, it's socially acceptable, it's cheap, and you know, many people can enjoy it socially with no problems, and there's other people that can't. Government make a lot of money from it, and there's lots of people that make judgments about people that have got a drink problem, and unfortunately, as with mental health, alcohol misuse is not talked about anywhere near enough, and there is still lots of shame around it. And I guess my sister and I decided to start our podcast, Two Roads Travel, because we wanted to raise awareness and educate people about alcohol misuse. Because actually the family members, even though they're living with someone with alcohol misuse, they don't actually understand about alcohol misuse often, and the impact it has on the body for the drinker, and the reason why they might be drinking. They just don't get it. They're dealing with the day-to-day chaos. And it was important for us to start raising awareness, to start educating people about it, so that they realize it isn't just a fun thing that you should trivialize. And you know, and that's why I set up my Respect for Alcohol campaign, because that's exactly all we need to do. This has been going for decades, and we still don't seem to be as far forward as I think we should be. If we have a respect for alcohol, just like we do with cocaine or any other illicit drug, maybe we wouldn't actually have some of the problems that we have today. And I think people underestimate the damage that it does, and often they're not really interested until such times as it impacts them directly. So the campaign is to try and get people to have a respect for alcohol. We're not saying people shouldn't drink. We're just saying have a respect for a drug that destroys people's lives and actually costs the NHS billions, as it does affect crime figures. And, you know, the cost to all of us as taxpayers is huge.
Would you agree? So I think that alcohol abuse is a symptom of mental health issues.
100%.
And that the two are linked. I mean, I've known several people with drink issues, and when you look at them, it's not that they kind of like had a drink and then suddenly got addicted to it. It often helps like mask loneliness, or as you said earlier on, you might have a particular type of behavior, and you might want to try and sort of put that behavior down or boost it up.
Yeah, 100%.
Some people can deal with it, and a lot of people can't. I firmly believe that it's like drug abuse, in that it's either an escape, or it's a release, or it's linked to some kind of internal battle that you're going through.
100%. I mean, it's very rare to find somebody that's got alcohol dependence that it has not had some sort of trauma. Very unusual. Obviously, people start for various reasons, and at different times of their lives, they could have had a very good upbringing, and then all of a sudden, some trauma midlife, and then, you know, and it's easy for somebody to switch from social drinking to dependence, and it doesn't have to take particularly long. You know, my sister is also in recovery, and she did more damage to herself physically and mentally in 2 years than my dad ever did in the whole time of his drinking. And I also firmly believe that has a huge connection to gastric bypass surgery, but that's another topic. But the mental health side of things, 100%, you know, they both go hand in hand. Most of the people that I've spoken to that have got drink issues, low self-esteem, low self-worth, all of that kind of stuff. They've had some sort of trauma, basically been told they're worthless, and they use alcohol, as you've mentioned, as a coping strategy. You know, they are not afraid of death, they're afraid of life. Take away the alcohol, they've got nothing. You know, that is petrifying to them, because it's like, how am I going to cope without this thing? So whenever families are trying to get them to stop, they're thinking, well, no, this is the only thing I've got that's keeping me going. So, yeah, the mental health thing, 100%.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really big point, is the fact that for some people, or for a lot of people with a drink problem, it's the drink that keeps them going and actually stops them from doing something drastic, you know, like attempting their own life, for example.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, you know, there's obviously domestic abuse and, you know, the mental health side of it, and then the alcohol, you know, it's the toxic trio, and it's so prevalent. And unfortunately, you know, just, it's not just about alcohol dependence either. You know, my sort of mission and stuff is around recognizing that, you know, you can be a binge drinker and still have an impact. You can be a heavy drinker and it still impacts your life, whether that's your inability to sleep, you know, impacting on your health, your mental health. You know, you don't have to just be alcohol dependent for there to be a problem, you know. And I think that we can either focus on one or the other. It's like, well, I'm just a social drinker, or you know, alcohol dependence, but there is, you know, bits in between those two.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to alcohol dependence. I mean, just because you're a binge drinker and you drink, you know, everything on a Saturday doesn't mean to say you're not an alcoholic or have alcoholic dependency. It just means you kind of save it all up to the end of the week so that you don't get caught out when you're at work or whatever. I mean,
Well,
sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that you have, it's all about the impact, you know. And if you're a binge drinker, what impact is that having on your life? Is it having an impact on your work, your relationships, your health, your sleep? And the same with heavy drinking. What impact is that having on you? Are you, you know, becoming more of a recluse? Are you being secretive? You know, what is the impact? And that's what we need to look at, because it impacts on everyone in different ways. Men, women, you know, different cultures, everything. You know, it's such a complex area and so difficult to pinpoint one thing, you know, for everyone. It's, you know, it is complex.
Again, I think coming back to this issue of mental health, there's so not so little, but the funding from, you know, government and the NHS on tackling mental health issues is tiny to what, you know, to what it could be and what it should be, really. I mean, alcohol dependency, as you've mentioned several times now, causes so many associated issues. You know, simple things like falling downstairs and breaking your leg because you can't maintain your balance. George Best, probably the world's most famous alcoholic, liver transplant, you know, in and out of hospital for years because of alcohol related problems. And this is kind of like the unseen element of alcohol dependency. All of the, I don't want to use the word small, but all of the kind of ancillary issues that it causes and has caused over time and continues to cause. I mean, the Saturday night fights, for example. Oh, looks like you've frozen on me. Are you still there? I'll just pause for a second. George Best is probably one of the most famous or infamous alcoholics in the UK. I mean, he had what, you know, the liver transplants, he was in and out of hospital all the time. And I think it's this almost hidden effect that alcohol dependency has on society as a whole. I mean, you mentioned earlier on the NHS spending a fortune on alcohol-related issues, but also for families, the impact, you know, somebody falling down the stairs because they've had a bit too much to drink, and all the summertime. Because I worked with the NHS in my previous job for a while, and they were talking to me about what they call like the Sunday summer, or the summer Sunday syndrome. This is people that are having barbecues on a Sunday afternoon on a Sunday. They'd have a bit too much to drink, and they'd start, you know, the barbecue forks would go through their hand, or they'd tip the barbecues on themselves. All these kind of silly related issues that are caused by people having not necessarily alcohol dependency, but having one too much, and not realizing the impact that alcohol has on our bodies, our systems, and then just kind of losing control. The Saturday night fights, and again, is another one. Young men in particular, young women as well these days, getting filled up with alcohol, and then the kind of the aggressive behavior gets magnified, and everybody ends up in hospital, having fights in hospital, and being the hospital staff being overwhelmed, having to deal with all this kind of the consequences of booze, I guess.
Yeah, and we see on the TV, some of the police programs and things, if anyone watches those, that a lot of them are alcohol related, some of the issues, or alcohol and drug related sometimes. So, it is a huge cost, and we also can't put a cost on the emotional damage that it does to, the families and the drinkers, because the drinkers are a victim of their own past as well, and we need to recognize that, they're struggling as well. And the last thing they need are judgments from everybody, because they already feel pretty crap about themselves. So the last thing we need to do is start judging them about how rubbish they are in society and how much of a drain they are, and all the rest of it. And I think it is quite difficult because people often see it as a choice, and it's like you're doing it to yourself, rather than an illness like diabetes or cancer, for example.
No, it's strange that, because people that overeat people never say to their faces, you're doing it to yourself. But I mean, what is the solution, or is there a solution? Because banning alcohol would never work. I mean, prohibition in the 1930s, 20s, 30s in the United States proved that people will go to all kinds of lengths to enjoy a drink. So what is the solution? Is there a solution?
I think it's, well, obviously to them, alcohol is the solution. And I think that it is complex, because underneath a lot of this stuff is about our emotions and the issues that we're facing in our lives. And, it comes from our parents, their insecurities, and it has a knock-on effect. And then we, put that on our children and so on. And I think that ultimately, we need to catch it early. We need to have support there for young children. We need to start recognizing and looking at their behaviors and supporting them in the best way we can, so that they can start to talk about their feelings. They can start to openly share and communicate those feelings, so that they're not bottling them up and using alcohol or drugs or any other addiction, gambling, whatever it might be, as a way of numbing those feelings. So we need to start looking at it from that perspective. But also, we need to start changing. It's sort of a multi-pronged attack, really. We need to start, doing what I'm trying to do and many other charities and organisations are trying to do around changing the judgments and perceptions, understanding, increasing knowledge, learning more. People need, we, quite rightly can be naive if we don't understand. There's lots of things I don't understand about until somebody starts to educate me about it, and then I can change my maybe perceptions of something, can be like, oh crikey, I didn't realize, whether that's the LGBT community or whatever it might be, whether it's disability or anything. If we can educate people, we start to get a much better awareness, and then we can develop compassion, and have that compassion for others, so that we can support them in the best way, rather than judging them, which isn't going to motivate them for change. But a lot of us, it's intrinsic in our nature to resist change. And I think that's often because we look at the change that needs to be made in its entirety. And that is enough to put us off and keep us stuck and immobilize us in doing anything. Because we look at that big goal that we want, and whilst it's important to know what that goal is and have it in the midst, in the future, we need to break it down to minute bits that seem much more reasonable and doable to move us forward to that goal. Otherwise, we just don't even bother starting it. And often we can feel like we're not, if we haven't got the right support to do it and the right people in our lives to help us, we just think we won't get there.
You use an interesting word, and I think we'll probably need more of it in lots of spheres of the world. Compassion. Do you think, Joe, that maybe we need to from a very early age, get people to develop their compassion for themselves and for other people, to help remove the stigmas associated with all kinds of addictions and mental challenges that people face.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the trouble is, obviously, with a lot of situations with children, if they're in an environment like I was, who's going to teach me compassion? And I might learn that at school, from my teachers, or maybe my friends' parents, or some other way. But ultimately, we need it to be enforced from our parents, for them to teach us as their children. But for people that live in very difficult home environments, that's not going to happen.
That's right. And if the parents don't have compassion, then they're not the ones to teach it. I mean, it's almost as if, currently in the UK, social workers work with families that have major challenges for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
What we're saying is kind of like every family should have their own social worker to make sure that that the kids get the best start in life from a perspective of compassion and understanding and learning and all those kind of associated things.
Yeah, obviously we're all flawed human beings to some degree, and there's lots of things that we may do, intentionally or not, that are going to have a direct impact on ourselves, others in our immediate family, work, and all the rest of it. And whilst we may not intend for those unhealthy, negative things to happen, it doesn't matter whether we intend it or not, it can still happen. And then how do we deal with it? Because that will have a direct impact on how somebody thinks and feels about themselves. If they've got their own insecurities, it's like a concertina effect, isn't it? It just has a knock-on effect all the time. And I think that if we can start with the new generation, and we can encourage compassion, self-love, all of those good things, resilience is key. How can we help people to become more resilient so that they can cope when things don't go their way, and acceptance of life on its own terms, and recognizing that actually life is not fair. And very often we can have this attitude of, well, that shouldn't have happened. Yeah, you're right, it shouldn't have. But you know what? Life's fair, and there's not a lot we can do about that. We have to accept life on life's terms. And it's just some basic general stuff like that I think would really arm our young generation, was it Gen Alpha now, to be more able to kind of, have that love for themselves, and also be able to show that externally. And I think it has, definitely changed in terms of society, the younger generation now accepting, people as they are. They don't really care whether you're gay, straight, black, white, whatever. They can be quite open to that. But again, it depends on your parents and the beliefs that they had and what they've imparted on you.
Yeah, but it's kind of 50-50, because a lot of young people still have a lot of challenges that we faced when we were kids. And there's still a lot of, young people addicted to various substances and getting in trouble with the police and all the rest of it.
Of course.
But as you say, it's a work in process, and it's an ongoing thing. Coming to, saying that it's a work in process, you work with the daughters of alcoholics. What does that involve, and how do you actually help daughters of alcoholics?
So I work with them on a one-to-one basis, and often, obviously, I'm seeing very much the same sort of characteristics. I use emotional freedom technique and neurolinguistic programming, and we work together to start looking at some of their typical challenges that they'll face. Lots of things around people pleasing, self-sabotage, self-loathing, low self-esteem, relationship issues. The list is endless, really. Shame is a really big one as well. And we start to look at those things, we start to understand, where did that potentially come from? And obviously I use EFT to work with them and start to educate them and help them. I spend a lot of my time actually, sounds weird to say, but giving them permission, giving them permission to feel the way they do, and that it's okay that they might hate their dad or their mum, no matter how shameful they might feel saying it or how disloyal. It's just about saying, okay, so you hate them, that's how you feel right now. And it's all about acknowledging their feelings, acknowledging where they're at. I'm not there to judge them. It makes no difference to me whether they want to see their parent or not, or make changes. I'm there to support them. And very often they will not think it's normal. They often will think they're very weird or different. And so really it's about saying, do you know what, you're not, and this is really common. And that in and of itself will bring a huge amount of relief, because they feel connected to somebody that gets it. And that's one of the things they always say to me, you know, you just get it. And so, well, of course I do, I've been there.
You said something interesting there about you giving people permission to feel their way they want to feel.
Or are feeling.
Or are feeling. What do you think it is about that people need permission to feel the way they're feeling, or the way they want to feel, shall we say?
Yeah, because they have had their whole life being told what they feel and what they see isn't really happening or isn't important, or, you know, so self-doubt comes in, because, you know, they're seeing their parent drunk and all sorts of things going on, and the other parent saying, no, everything's fine. So that causes very mixed signals, and they start to wonder, well, okay, so what I'm seeing is not really true then. And they start doubting themselves. And they've probably learned from their parents that it's not okay. Well, it isn't. That's what they've learned. It's not okay to feel. It's not okay to show my feelings. It's not okay to have these feelings. That's bad. I'm a bad person. And then it, you know, knocks onto their self-esteem. And so, you know, and I always try to get them to think and around, like, be more curious about stuff rather than critical. So if you can be curious with, oh, I wonder why I feel like that, or I wonder why she said that, rather than, oh, why did I do that? Why did I, you know, and it has a very different feel to it. And I think that a lot of them, again, feel a sense of relief by that.
So curious rather than critical. Yeah. What do you do to get your message out? How do you let people know that you are around, that you help people with, or will you help daughters of alcoholics? How do they find you? What do you do?
So I'm on pretty much most of the social media platforms, either under Joe Huey or Joe Huey ACOA. And I've obviously got my website, joehuey.co.uk, where I advertise, you know, and have lots of resources, YouTube videos, you know, lots. I have my own course that I offer, which uses my peace framework. So it's like a self-development course that people can work through if they're at that stage in their life. And I have my Daughters of Alcoholics Facebook group, which has grown ridiculously in this COVID period. I think I had about 60 members in May, and I've got about 450.
Wow.
So, and it's a lovely community, and the ladies in there, some of them have never spoken to anybody about their experience before. And there's that connection that a lot of them are missing. And so, yeah, so, and I do talks as well to, you know, audiences that are interested in my story. I do training to social workers and mental health, you know, first aid instructors, to get that message out as well, so that, you know, they can feel more equipped to deal with young children and families that they're supporting.
Okay, final thoughts. What's one, I don't want to use the word advice, what's one thing that someone who is the daughter of an alcoholic can actually do to help themselves?
Reach out, I think, is the one thing they can do for themselves. It will be the best thing they do, even though it will be probably for some of them the most scariest thing they can do. It will be the best thing for them, because a lot of them feel very disconnected and very alone. So when they connect with people exactly like them, it will bring a huge sense of relief, and they will not feel, you know, weird, different, odd. So that's the one thing I think that, you know, would really help them.
Okay, organizations like the AA, do they help people who are relatives of alcoholics, you know, wives, husbands, sons, daughters, that kind of thing?
So no. I mean, they have open meetings. So AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, are worldwide, been going years, but they are there for the primary focus of the person with alcohol misuse issues who want to either reduce or, you know, become abstinent. AlAnon is the group that you would go to if you were a family member. I do support family members. I just specialize in daughters, but so family members can go to an AlAnon meeting, you under normal circumstances face to face, or there are online meetings as well. There's a website called In the Rooms. They also offer support online for adult children and people with addictions, so everybody. So yeah, so AlAnon, and then you've got AlAteen, which are for young adults. I think from the age of 12 up to about 16, and then you can go to the AlAnon meetings.
Okay.
And then you've got NACOA as well. They offer a helpline for children and anybody really that wants to have some support from a trained counsellor over the phone.
Right. So what I'll do is I'll put all of those links in the notes of the podcast. Listen, Joe, it's been fabulous having you on today. Thank you so much for your time. Any final thoughts, any final words before we go? I
think just for people to be mindful, really, mindful of alcohol misuse, mindful of your response around alcohol use and misuse, and, you know, to be as compassionate as you can be.
I think that's a great way to end. Be as compassionate as you can be, not just for members of families with alcoholics in them, but generally everywhere.
Yeah, 100%.
On that note, Joe, thanks very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh.